Some things look like the smallest gestures, yet they quietly become the most important parts of your life. A warm pie, fresh from the oven, carried across an old wooden fence on a quiet Arizona morning. A tired, 54-year-old cowboy who had long stopped expecting anything good to come his way, and a young woman who had been bringing that goodness anyway. For 3 full years. No one asked her to. She never kept score. Her name was Naya Whispering Pine. His name was Elias Blackthorn. And this is the story of how one simple pie crossed more than just a fence. It crossed time, fear, gossip, and the hardest distance of all, the one between 2 lonely hearts. Her dark braids, adorned with a single eagle feather, swayed gently as she walked. In her hands, she carried a simple tin pie dish, still warm from the wood stove. The crust was golden, filled with dried apples and wild berries she had gathered herself. For 3 years now, she had made this quiet journey across the old wooden fence that separated her small plot from the neighboring ranch. Elias Blackthorn stood on his weathered porch, leaning against a post, his faded cowboy hat shading eyes that had seen too many hard seasons. At 54, the tall, lean cowboy looked every bit the poor widower he was. His shirt was patched, his boots cracked, and the ranch he struggled to keep was barely enough to feed his few head of cattle. 3 years ago, his wife and young son had been taken by the same fever that swept through the territory. Since then, he had lived in silence until the Apache woman next door began leaving small gifts of food by his fence. This morning, Naya stopped at the fence line. The pie's sweet aroma mixed with the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. "Morning, Elias," she said softly, her voice carrying the quiet strength of her people. He turned, surprised as always. A tired smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, deepening the lines on his sun-browned face. "You keep spoiling an old man, Naya. One of these days I'll have nothing to give back." She held out the pie. Their fingers brushed for the briefest moment as he took the dish. For 3 years, she had never asked for thanks. She simply came. Elias looked down at the golden crust, then back at her. Something in his chest shifted a feeling he had long tried to bury. Half joking, half sighing, he said, "If I were younger by 10 years, Naya, I'd marry you right now." The wind whispered through the tall grass. Naya did not laugh. She looked straight into his eyes with a seriousness that made the mountains themselves seem to hold their breath. 10 years would not be enough, Elias. The words hung between them like morning mist. Elias froze, the pie suddenly heavy in his hands. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. Across the fence, the old wooden posts stood as silent witnesses, a barrier that had separated their 2 worlds for years. In the distance, the first faint sounds of the Tucson stagecoach could be heard. Soon the town would be talking again. A young Apache woman and an aging, penniless cowboy. Some would call it impossible. Others would call it trouble. But on that quiet morning, as Naya turned and walked back toward her cabin, Elias Blackthorn remained on his porch, watching her go, the warm pie in his hands and a storm quietly beginning in his heart. Winter came early that year to the Santa Catalina foothills. Cold winds swept down from the mountains, carrying the threat of snow that could bury a man's last hopes along with his cattle. Yet every few days, a small figure wrapped in a woven blanket could be seen crossing the old wooden fence. Naya Whispering Pine continued her quiet ritual. Sometimes it was a pie made from dried apples and mesquite beans. Sometimes a pot of hearty stew thickened with wild herbs. Only her people knew. Elias Blackthorn, the aging cowboy, no longer pretended to be surprised. He would wait on the porch, his breath visible in the frosty air, hands rough from mending fences, and doctoring sick horses. One frost-covered morning, the fence line buckled under the weight of a fallen mesquite branch after a strong storm. Elias was struggling to lift it when Naya appeared. "Let me help," she said simply. He almost refused, old pride rising like a stubborn mule, but the look in her dark eyes stopped him. Together they worked, shoulders brushing, breath mingling in the cold. When the fence was repaired, Elias wiped sweat from his brow despite the chill. "You're stronger than you look, Naya," he muttered. She smiled faintly. "And you are more stubborn than your old mule, Elias." That was the beginning of their gentle banter. Small words exchanged across the fence that slowly built something warmer than friendship. In return for her food, Elias taught her practical ranch skills. He showed her how to gentle a wild Mustang colt that wandered onto her land, speaking softly to the horse with the patience only a man who had lost everything could possess. Naya, in turn, taught him the old ways of her people, which roots could heal a deep cut on his arm, how to find water when the creek ran dry. As spring painted the plains with wildflowers, their meetings grew longer. They would sit on opposite sides of the fence, sharing coffee from a dented tin cup. Elias spoke of his late wife and the son he buried under a simple wooden cross. Naya told him of the long march her family endured, how she chose to stay on this small piece of land rather than follow the others to the reservation. One golden afternoon, a rider approached Naya's cabin. It was Colton Reed, the handsome young son of the largest ranch owner near Tucson. Dressed in fine clothes with a silver saddle, he carried promises of security and a civilized life. He spoke loudly enough for Elias to hear from his porch. "You don't belong with an old broken-down cowboy, Miss Naya. Come with me, and you'll never want for anything again." Naya's answer was quiet but firm. "I already have everything I need right here." Colton left angry. That evening, when Naya brought another pie across the fence, Elias could not hide his worry. "You could have a better life with him," he said gruffly, staring at the mountains. "A younger man, a richer one." Naya set the warm pie down and looked at him for a long moment. "I do not measure a man by the coins in his pocket or the years on his back, Elias. I measure him by the kindness in his hands and the honesty in his eyes." The sun dipped low, turning the sky the color of ripe berries. Elias's fingers tightened around the porch rail. For the first time in 3 years, he felt the old fence between them was no longer just wood and wire. It had become something he was afraid to cross. Yet every time Naya walked away, the scent of pie lingering in the air, Elias felt his heart pull a little harder toward the woman on the other side. By early summer of 1888, the small town of Tucson was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. News traveled fast along the dusty trails. A young Apache woman was openly caring for the old, penniless cowboy, Elias Blackthorn. At the general store, at the blacksmith's, and after Sunday service, people shook their heads. "Unnatural," some said. "She's using him for his land," others whispered. "A girl like that, with a man old enough to be her father? Scandalous." The gossip reached Elias first. He was in town buying nails when the sheriff's wife cornered him. "You ought to send that Indian girl away, Mr. Blackthorn, before she breaks your heart or worse." Elias returned to his ranch with a heavy chest. That afternoon, when Naya crossed the fence with a fresh berry pie, he could not hide his turmoil. The mountains of Santa Catalina stood witness as he spoke. "You should listen to them, Naya. This, whatever this is, it's only going to bring you pain." Naya set the pie down carefully on the porch rail. Her braids caught the sunlight as she lifted her chin. "I have heard worse things in my life, Elias. When my people were forced from our homes, when soldiers burned our crops. Words are just wind. I stay because I choose to. Not long after, Colton Reed returned. This time he came with gifts, fine cloth, a silver bracelet, and bold promises. He stood tall in front of Naya's cabin, voice carrying across the fence. Marry me, and you'll live like a queen. No more scraping by on this dry patch of dirt. No more caring for some broken old man who has nothing to offer. Naya's voice was calm but carried the strength of the desert wind. I do not want a queen's life, Mr. Reed. I want a life with respect. Elias has shown me more kindness with his calloused hands than you ever could with all your silver. Colton rode away furious, spitting dust behind him. That night, a fierce thunderstorm rolled down from the mountains. Lightning cracked the sky. Elias's old barn roof collapsed under the driving rain, and in the chaos, he slipped on wet wood, gashing his leg badly. Alone and feverish, he lay in the dark. He did not expect her. But Naya came. Soaking wet, she forced her way through the storm, lantern in hand. She found him on the porch, bleeding. Without a word, she tore strips from her own blanket, cleaned the wound with herbs she carried, and helped him inside. All night she stayed, tending the fire, wiping his fevered brow, speaking softly in her language when the pain made him groan. In the quiet hours before dawn, as the storm eased, Elias looked at her, sitting beside his bed. His voice was hoarse. Why, Naya? Why do you keep coming back to an old fool like me? She looked at him, firelight dancing in her eyes. Because I see the man. Elias. Not the years, not the rumors, just the man who still gets up every morning to care for his animals, who never raises his voice in anger, who lost everything yet still has gentleness left. Elias turned his face away, tears mixing with the rain still dripping from his hair. For the first time in many years, the stubborn cowboy felt his heart cracking open, and it terrified him. He spent the next days avoiding her, limping around his ranch, trying to push her away for her own good. But every time he looked toward the fence, he saw Naya's silhouette in the distance, patient as the mountains themselves. The storm inside his heart was only beginning. The summer of 1888 burned hot across the Arizona territory. Days passed in heavy silence after the storm. Elias Blackthorn kept to his side of the fence, limping through his chores, his heart heavier than the saddle he carried. He told himself it was the right thing to let Naya go, to spare her the pain of loving a man twice her age in a world that would never accept them. But Naya Whispering Pine did not leave. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Santa Catalina Mountains, painting the sky in streaks of fiery orange and deep purple, she crossed the fence once more. This time she carried no pie, only herself. She found Elias sitting on the old wooden porch, staring at the horizon. The air was still warm, filled with the scent of dry earth and blooming desert flowers. He looked up when her shadow fell across the boards. "Naya, you shouldn't be here," he said, voice rough. She sat down on the edge of the porch, a few feet away, respecting the invisible line he had drawn. For a long time, only the sound of crickets and distant coyotes filled the space between them. Finally she spoke. "I have waited 3 years, Elias. Not because I am foolish, but because I see you. The real you. The man who talks gently to frightened horses. The man who shares his last cup of coffee. The man who lost his family yet still wakes up every day and chooses to be kind." Elias's hands trembled on his knees. He kept his eyes on the mountains. "I'm 54 years old, Naya. Poor as dirt. Half broken, you're young, beautiful. You deserve a future children, a strong man by your side, a life without people spitting at you in town for choosing me." Naya turned to face him fully, her voice steady and warm like the last light of day. I do not want a future built on what other people think is proper. I want a life built on respect, on honesty, on love that sees the heart first." She paused, then added softly, "10 years would never have been enough, because my heart already chose you long ago." The words landed deep. Elias stood slowly, wincing at the pain in his leg, and walked to the edge of the porch. The old wooden fence stood just beyond, silhouetted against the dying sun. For 3 years it had been a barrier. Tonight, it felt like a choice. He turned back to her, eyes glistening. "I've been a coward, Naya. Afraid of what people would say. Afraid of growing old while you're still young. Afraid of loving again and losing again." His voice cracked. "But I'm more afraid of waking up one day, knowing I let the best thing in my life walk away because I was too stubborn to cross this damn fence." Slowly, painfully, he stepped down from the porch. He walked to the fence, lifted the loose rail with his calloused hands, and for the first time in 3 years, he crossed fully to her side. He knelt before her on the warm earth. "I don't have much to offer, just these old hands and a heart that's finally brave enough." Naya Whispering Pine. "If you'll have me, I want to court you proper. No more hiding, no more excuses." Tears slipped down Naya's cheeks as she reached out and took his weathered hands in hers. "Yes, Elias. I've been waiting for you to ask." The sun slipped behind the mountains, but on that old porch, something new and beautiful began to glow brighter than any sunset the Arizona sky had ever seen. In the autumn of 1888, under the golden cottonwoods near the Santa Catalina Mountains, Elias Blackthorn and Naya Whispering Pine were married in the simplest way, no grand ceremony. Just a few respectful neighbors, a traveling preacher, and the old wooden fence they had finally torn down together. Naya wore a dress of soft deerskin decorated with beads she had made herself. Elias wore his cleanest shirt, boots polished until they shone. When they exchanged vows, the wind carried their words across the high plains like a blessing. Life was not easy in the years that followed. The Arizona territory was changing. Railroads came, towns grew, old wounds between cultures still lingered. But on their small, combined ranch, something beautiful took root. They worked side by side, Naya teaching Elias the wisdom of the land and healing plants, Elias teaching her the ways of cattle and honest ranching. Their love became a quiet example that respect could bridge any divide. 12 years later, in 1900, the ranch had grown greener. 2 children, a boy with his father's steady hands, and a girl with her mother's bright eyes, ran through the tall grass chasing fireflies. The old porch had been repaired and expanded. The fence was gone, replaced by open land where horses grazed freely. One quiet evening, as the sun once again painted the Santa Catalina Mountains in hues of orange and purple, Naya, now 36, still strong and graceful, carried a warm pie across the yard. The scent of apples and wild berries filled the air, just as it had 13 years earlier. Elias Blackthorn, now 66, sat in his favorite rocking chair on the porch. His hair had turned silver, his shoulders a little more stooped, but his eyes still lit up when he saw his wife approaching. Naya stopped at the bottom step, smiling softly. "Fresh from the oven," she said. Elias reached out, took the pie, and set it aside. Then he gently pulled her down to sit beside him. For a long moment they rocked together, watching their children play in the distance. "Remember that first pie?" he asked, voice warm with memory. "How could I forget?" Naya laughed lightly. "You said if you were 10 years younger, you'd marry me right then." Elias chuckled, the sound deep and content. He took her hand, still callous from years of shared work, and brought it to his lips. 10 years would never have been enough, Naya. A lifetime still feels too short. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the same scent of sage and earth it had all those years ago. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal, watching over the small ranch where two hearts had proven that love needs no permission from age, culture, or the opinions of others. As the sun finally set, Elias rested his head against Naya's shoulder. Their children's laughter floated back to them. In that moment, the circle was complete, from a simple pie carried across a fence to a lifetime built on respect, kindness, and courage. And so the high plains taught a quiet truth. Real love does not count years or listen to whispers. It only asks two hearts brave enough to cross the fence and keep choosing each other every single day.
What do you think about Naya and Elias's story? Have you ever faced barriers related to age, culture, or social prejudice in your own relationship, or in the relationships of people close to you? And if so, how did you choose to overcome them? Share your story honestly in the comments below. I would truly love to hear everyone's experiences. This story is not just a love story from the Old West. It is a gentle yet powerful reminder that genuine love always begins with respect for another human being. In our time, when people are so often judged by their age, appearance, wealth, or background, Naya and Elias teach us a simple yet profound lesson. Equals. Look at the heart instead of the number of years on a birth certificate. Be brave enough to step beyond the fences that society builds. And most importantly, do not wait until you are young enough, rich enough, or perfect enough before allowing yourself to love. Love does not wait for prejudice to disappear. It only waits for a heart that is brave enough to embrace it. This story also offers a refreshing perspective. Love between two people who are different in age or culture is not an exception. It can become a source of healing and strength. Elias learned how to heal the wounds of his past through Naya's patience. Naya found belonging and respect in a world that had once pushed her aside. Together they built a home not only with wood and earth, but with understanding and mutual respect every single day. I hope that after reading this story, you feel a little warmer inside and a little braver as well. No matter your age or your circumstances, remember this. True love will always be worth crossing the fence for. Thank you for joining me in creating and completing this story. And thank you to everyone who stayed and listened until the very end. I hope you will subscribe to the channel and support my work.